one of my favorite days actually, because we are focusing on smart cities and the evolution of the metaverse and so much more beyond that. So from the title, you guys might have guessed we're touching on the world's first metaverse embassy, which is a really fascinating subject. And Gabriel Abed will be joining us very shortly to discuss that. And Evin will be moderating. But just before we do get onto that topic, I am actually going to welcome Evin, who is the co-founder of Serto, onto the conversation. Evin, great to have you here. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, Jess.
Absolute pleasure to have you as well. Really exciting time. And just while we do join in, so a lot of our viewers that are watching live, make sure you do interact with myself and Evin throughout this conversation. We might be able to pull in some of the questions surrounding the metaverse because there is so much that has happened this year. Evin, where do we even start with 2021 and just metaverse developments?
So this year has been an extremely exciting experience for all of those of us tuned into the developments of the metaverse and the Web3 ecosystem. I think one of the most exciting things that we've seen over the past year is really the solidifying of multiple metaverses, the development of NFT-based land distributions, and the custom development of enterprise and government presence in these kinds of platforms. So, as you've mentioned, it's exciting that we're hearing some government development, from Barbados, exploration of that space. But I definitely think that this was the year of brands and enterprises exploring what it means to have a metaverse practice.
And you're right in saying that it has exceeded most of our expectations. I know we saw news of Nike, Adidas really exploring this metaverse realm and using NFTs almost as digital keys to unlock different metaverse worlds. So for a lot of people that are watching, they might have heard the word metaverse, they might have been able to watch some videos and educate themselves slightly. But I think that next step of really introducing themselves into the metaverse does seem like a wild concept. So for people like you and me, where would we even begin?
So often you'll hear people use the word metaverse when they're describing a persistent digital environment, often described as via a VR platform. So these different applications such as Decentraland and Sandbox essentially offer an ecosystem into which you can enter as an avatar, as a digital avatar, and interact with other individuals represented as avatars, construct digital buildings that your avatars can traverse, and even display NFT art objects inside of those buildings. And so the presentation of self in digital space now can have a three-dimensional form. However, one of the big challenges I think we're going to start to see is interoperability between these metaverses, between these persistent digital environments, as well as interoperability with in-person physical spaces.
And you're right in saying that once you open your world to this metaverse thing, interoperability is really significant. Being able to go from a retail metaverse into a metaverse, which is government backed, as you were saying, and then all the way through into a social media platform, and really having a good ease of use for a consumer, for people like me and you. So you are definitely someone that is equipped to answer when it comes to different metaverses and different experiences. What are some of the key standout experiences that you really value when you are on a metaverse, when you're navigating the system, that users that haven't yet experienced it might be surprised to find out?
So one of the interesting things about virtual reality metaverse environments is that often you need to use a virtual reality headset to access them. You got to strap some goggles onto your face. Sometimes it feels like as big as an iPad. But those hardware devices are typically designed for men. From the spacing between the eyes to the center of gravity expected by the avatar that you will be occupying when you put on that headset. And so one of the greatest challenges for me has been feeling physically comfortable traversing these metaverses. Personally, even though it's a little bit less immersive, I prefer Decentraland because I can enjoy it from the full screen of my device, as opposed to having to put on a VR headset that can often make me feel pretty nauseous because these devices weren't built for someone like me.
Very interesting point. And you started to answer the next question I was going to ask when it comes to maybe favorite metaverses that you have, maybe some that you think these are the ones to watch in 2022 and to keep your eyes peeled. I know I've personally tried to experience Sandbox on this channel actually, and that was a whole world in itself. And I found it really interesting, the different size plots of land, even down to the different people that had acquired land. There was Snoop Dogg, even Care Bears have acquired land on Sandbox. So it is really remarkable. You've mentioned Decentraland. What are some of the key points about Decentraland that you like so much?
I really like Decentraland because of its accessibility. So, as I mentioned, do not require a headset in order to be able to visually enjoy the content there, to be able to traverse that space, or even attend metaverse events yourself as an avatar. So, accessibility is really important for me. Obviously, it doesn't make a lot of sense if we create a metaverse that's only acceptable to those individuals who have the most resources or the most access to hardware. And so, when it comes to building a truly equitable future, we need to think about how people are accessing these platforms. However, you also mentioned the Sandbox, which I think is an extremely exciting ecosystem, exactly because of what you described, the participation of brands, cultural leaders, cultural institutions wanting to express themselves in these digital spaces. One other metaverse that I would like to call out for our viewers that's really exciting is called the World Wide Web, Web with two B's. So Thomas Webb is an incredible digital artist, as well as an artist with a more traditional physical media practice. And in February of 2021, he released a 16-bit metaverse that looks a lot like the Pokemon games that I played growing up. But what was really exciting about that is that it was announced as a mobile environment that you could walk through as a little character to view NFTs that he'd created that were available for sale. And so what was really interesting about that at the time was that we were mostly relying on Clubhouse to inform us of new drops. And so being able to move from a voice drop-in audio app and be directed into a mobile experience that was a persistent digital environment with different characters, activities to do, ways to interact, and objects to collect. And that way, that form of introduction was extraordinarily accessible to people accessing globally because they were able to jump in on their mobile device as well as their computer. And recently, this VR environment, or rather, sorry, the 16-bit metaverse also had a land sale. And the way that you got on the whitelist was that you performed a series of tasks within the environment, essentially playing a game, following little quests given to you by other characters in that environment. And so this particularly engaging, immersive, and interaction-driven experience already had a user journey carved out for you, where you would be able to achieve, different goals along the way. And so when we think about the sort of prescribed curated experience that we like to enjoy in other content such as film or TV, I think that we're going to see a lot more of this kind of prescribed adventure and game-based experience in metaverses to come.
Amazing. No, it certainly sounds so exciting. And speaking of exciting kind of movements ahead, so Gabriel has just joined the line, so I'll let him sync up his camera and then join on. But I'm so excited for the next stage of this conversation. You guys are really going to be diving deep into the government element of governments that are extremely forward thinking when it comes to welcoming themselves onto the metaverse, and also how to ensure that other governments that are watching aren't really left behind. So Gabriel Abed, who is the founder of BIT and also an advocate and ambassador for Barbados, for the UAE and other regions. Gabriel, first of all, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to leave you in Evin's capable hands now to continue on the conversation. Really look forward to hearing it, guys. Thank you so much.
Hello,
Gabriel,
everyone.
welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you great. We're so glad that you've joined us and would love to hear a little bit more about you. Would you mind giving us a brief introduction to the hat that you're wearing when you come to the table today?
At the moment, I currently serve as Barbados's ambassador to the United Arab Emirates. But previously, in another life, I was heavily involved in the blockchain industry. I was one of the co-founders of Bit, an early startup in 2014 that pioneered central bank digital currencies, and subsequently was a co-founder of Digital Asset Capital Management, one of the brilliant hedge funds in our industry that looks to support and invest in protocol-driven networks.
Fantastic. Well, you and I have quite a lot in common then, although my focus is very much more toward interoperability and off-chain data, but would love to learn more about how your experiences in the tech space and now in a more government and sort of community-facing role are evolving alongside Web3. So we heard earlier in the conversation a hint at your interest in the metaverse and bringing the Barbadian government there. Can you share a little bit more about what that journey has been like and you know, making those kinds of decisions to bring the government into this new Web3 space?
Sure. Well, I think I would start with the precursor to say that the government of Barbados has always been pro-crypto. It's a very forward-thinking nation that understands the importance of technology. You know, Barbados was one of the first nations to be fully blanketed in fiber optics. We were the first to introduce a synthetic central bank digital currency as early as 2016. So the nation's always been very forward thinking in this regard. But, you know, when I even think about our theme at Expo 2020, it's from sugarcane to blockchain, showing that the government is really looking to show how it has progressed itself and progressing its nation over the years. But what led to the Metaverse Embassy was, of course, my role currently in becoming an ambassador. And as I began serving in this capacity, I realized that there were quite a few resource constraints as it relates to how we could have diplomatic relationships globally. You know, if you look at a large nation like the United States, they literally have hundreds of consulates and embassies. A little nation like Barbados has less than 20. So when, in this regard, in order to have that level of diplomatic parity, you have to try to do things differently. And another key aspect of it was, how do we ensure that for our nationals living all over the world, that we could provide them with an adequate consular service that blanketed global coverage. Furthermore, it was very important that Barbadians in general, start looking at Web3 technologies like the metaverse, like NFTs, like DAOs, and how they could progress into the future by not just being consumers, but by being those who build the next generation of technologies for the rest of the globe to consume.
Very exciting. Well, that is a wonderful journey to learn more about. Definitely identify with it. My parent company, Consensus, was one of the first entities to create a headquarters in the metaverse. So I know from our side, it was really exciting to learn about the process of voxel architects creating a digital expression for our entity and a place for our teams to gather. How involved, Gabriel, were you in the process of defining what that space and experience would be like from a user and experiential standpoint? How do you create digital architecture that represents global welcoming for a nation like Barbados?
I was very involved and still am very involved in the process. Generally speaking, it has been a team approach. We've been very fortunate that our government has some very skilled people within it, both on the directly on the inside and around the peripheral. So it was a team effort to get us to this point, from getting cabinet to approve it. We're very fortunate as well that not just our prime minister is all about innovation, pioneering, and leading. We're very fortunate as a nation to have a very influential global leader. But then our minister as well of foreign affairs, the minister Jerome Walcott, was, you know, it's not often you find a person in the field of diplomacy willing to test and experiment new ways of doing things. It's one of the very few fields that you see innovation taking place in. So the fact that we were able to get to the point where the PM, the Prime Minister, the Minister, and the Cabinet were all in agreement with signing off on this, it says a lot about the way that the nation is thinking. As it relates to the architectural designs, the build out, the look and the feel, the interactions, that's very much an ongoing conversation, something that we have not, I would say, finalized. It's still in those phases of where the specification requirements of what is expected, what does an end user expect to see when they would go into an e-consulate or a virtual environment? What are the basic services that we must provide? And what are the advanced services? And therefore, what type of features and what type of designs go into providing those features and experience? So that's very much an ongoing conversation, and one that's going to last several months, if not years, before we get to that final version. But it is happening all now. As a matter of fact, right after this interview, there's those conversations are happening.
Well, let's drill down a little bit into what you're planning to discuss in that case. Gabriel, would love to hear from your perspective, and obviously knowing this may change in the coming months and years, what would a hypothetical user experience be like for a Barbadian citizen who is visiting this consulate in virtual reality?
Well, I think it's first important to talk about the primary objective here. Before we talk about the secondary and tertiary. The primary objective of doing this Metaverse Embassy was less about providing services virtually, because let's be realistic here. Everything that you should be able to do in a Metaverse Embassy, I should be able to do on a website. That's the reality of it. So the primary reason for this was so that we could enter the new notion of getting that point of diplomatic parity, whereby on our virtual piece of real estate owned by the government of Barbados, let's just use another nation, maybe Liechtenstein, they happen to have a virtual piece of land as well. The idea would be they would set up an embassy on our plot of land, and we would set up an embassy on their plot of land. And in doing so, you start a form of commercial diplomacy focused around technology. And then other aspects of diplomacy can come in, things like cultural diplomacy. How do I trade my arts and crafts? How do I trade my talents, my music, my dance, and other types of initiatives that the virtual realm can represent? So that is the priority and primary reason of doing this. Now, from a user experience, the idea is to look at what we've already developed via website services and to look to emulate that, but then enhance the experience. Things like, how do I apply for a visa? How do I renew my passport? The key aspect here is that a Barbadian living in, let's just say, Poland, where we don't currently have a diplomatic mission, we can now replicate one digitally, and that Barbadian can actually now access these services virtually. The key idea as well is that the Metaverse Embassy's e-consular services will actually drive and push forward the advancement of our websites as well, because you can't just create a Metaverse service and then not have a website that's up to scratch, offering if not equal, if not better, but equal standards of providing information, content, and services.
Very exciting. Well, you mentioned standards of content and data here. Perhaps an interesting thing for our viewers to think about is the way that information will be shared in this metaverse. So as we know, if the only trustworthy information or trustless information we have about a counterparty is their crypto address, which is typically the primary identifier in these metaverse environments, the only thing we can learn about that counterparty is how much money they have or how many tokens they've purchased, their past financial history. We cannot trustlessly learn any personally identifiable information from a public blockchain because that's not a safe place to store it. So as citizens of Barbados and others interact in this consular environment using Web3 to share data about themselves, do you know how this data will be shared in a secure form because it is not appropriate for the blockchain?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something that we're thinking about heavily. I mean, cybersecurity on top of that, it's a very big issue. How can I ensure that a conversation between two diplomats isn't being eavesdropped on? This is another key area that we are working with the various metaverse platforms to ensure that we have some level of mathematical proof that a conversation is secure and that it's not being tapped into. But then to go back to your question about user privacy and how to guarantee that a pseudonymous user who then once becomes known to the government via identification, submission, some level of biometrics or heuristics being provided. These are areas where the conversation is ongoing and how we can guarantee or at least ensure that there's a level of privacy being maintained so that that user's information is not intercepted by a nefarious third party. Now, I think it might be a bit early for me to say what types of mechanisms are being used because those products just haven't been built yet. So when it does come to the time of building the product, let's just give it an example, a passport renewal process where Jane Doe needs to submit her passport. How do we ensure that Jane Doe's passport doesn't end up in the hands of some unknown user looking to exploit that? So I think this is where your standard solutions from your average web development or app development techniques come into play, where you may not go through a Web3 solution, but rather a centralized application for such. But again, I think it's too early to try to maneuver around that conversation to give the appropriate answer.
Well, it's wonderful to hear that the Barbadian government is open to exploring secure, leading edge technologies that protect the integrity and ownership of user data, as well as the privacy of privileged conversations, such as those that might happen between diplomats. One of the most exciting things, I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's not open, it's an absolute. We don't have a choice. The government can't be in the business of faulting its users.
I love that mindset. I think it's a wonderful and very, Web3 forward pillar of belief to have as you build this effort, and certainly one that I encourage other government officials from around the world to embrace and consider to, join folks like Gabriel in that mindset. One of the exciting things I think that's happening in Web3 is the ability for private off-chain data to trustlessly be transferred between parties. So all of the data that's not fit for the chain, we are now creating exciting new products that allow for that data to be owned and controlled by its subject, to be trusted by other parties who don't know the individual who wrote it, and even to protect things like state secrets. So we'll stay tuned as that technology evolves in support of this metaverse experience. So in terms of the government's relationship with Web3 and crypto, are there any other exciting hints that you might be able to provide to us about how this, leading edge of the ecosystem might affect everyday life for Barbadians in the future?
I would say this, it's without giving away anything I probably shouldn't be. The government of Barbados acknowledges that technology is one of the key pillars towards advancing one's nation and its people, especially as it becomes the norm for everyday lives. And where possible, the government of Barbados is looking to employ, whether it's blockchain technology or some sort of permission distributed ledger technology environment across the sector where it makes sense, where it's feasible, where it enhances the transparency and integrity of the data systems, where it could provide jobs and opportunities, where it can attract foreign direct investments. So the reality of this is the government understands that this is the future. And the idea here now is to welcome any and everybody who has an idea, who wishes to test new regulatory environments, who's looking for a great lifestyle on a sunny, white sanded, crystal clear blue water beach. You know, we were the first in the world to introduce the welcome stamp, which is a 1-year visa for anyone who wants to come to the island and work remotely. I mean, work onshore if they're remote from their current job site. So we're offering that, and we welcome everyone to come and enjoy not just a safe, comfortable, friendly environment, but to work with the government and the regulators on new types of technologies that could be applied globally, but happen to have initial application in Barbados.
That sounds like a very warm, sunny, and inspiring future for many entrepreneurs who I hope are listening now. So certainly for those of you whose teams are looking for new climbs or who are seeking an open, interested, and collaborative government who is reviewing new solutions, it sounds like Barbados is a wonderful place for you to take those ideas. So as we are just wrapping up here today, Gabriel, any words of encouragement for entrepreneurs who might be considering Barbados and the Barbadian community as a place to evolve their ideas, especially as it pertains to Web3?
Yeah, I would say, look, you know, government has this poor record of being slow, not open to innovation, not willing to try new things. And I would honestly say, you know, look at the United Arab Emirates and how far they have gone with their technology adoption, their forward thinkingness. Look at governments like Barbados. I would say that, you know, it's very much the opposite of what I'm seeing right now, where there are some governments, Bermuda, another one, that are just open, welcoming. They want you on their shores to come and build new types of technologies and to collaborate with them. It's not that they don't want to do it in some cases, it's just that they don't have the resources or the know-how or the information available. So make yourself available to these entities, and you'd be very quickly surprised that you might end up with either a contract or a country as a partner, and before you know it, you're building something that can impact and change the world and have a positive meaning to so many lives. And, you know, we think of Web3 and these different types of decentralized products in a way that's saying, hey, we don't need corporations and we don't need government. But at the end of the day, we're still living in an architectural environment that is state-driven and corporate-driven. And if we could bring these entities into the fold and work with them, it has a much better outcome, at least in the initial stages, for all of us.
I definitely agree. Well, I, for one, certainly look forward to reaching out about further collaboration with all of those exciting entities. Thank you so much, Gabriel, for joining us here today. It has been a very enlightening conversation. Jess, do you want to take it away? Are there any parting shots that we might hand over to you?
Yes, thank you so much, Evin and Gabriel. Thank you. And I think in the comments, we're having the recurring question of, is Metaverse a hype? And I think Barbados is a really prime example to show, no, this new technology is here to stay and it's being embraced by corporations, governments, and so on, and even more so. Such an exciting time. 2022 is going to be even bigger than I think we can all imagine. Thank you both so much for the time today. And thank you all so much to our viewers for tuning in. Just a reminder, guys, CoinMarketCap Christmas giveaway and promotions is available until the 25th of December. The link is in the description, so make sure to not miss out. And guys, thank you so much for your time today. Happy holidays. And it was an absolute